When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won, but instead it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot, and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now, too, and I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking and twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard two little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin as she is a couple of years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been in there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with a towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon because she seemed a bit disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now, and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought she would have to come back soon, but there was this little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna and came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think they want out. The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully, and we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before our grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what had just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner and I told them the story of what had just happened. They thought that I must have been exaggerating and they didn't believe me. I truly think that that woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her endgame? I'm 21 now, but I think about this interaction all the time, and when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one believes this story, and I get it. It's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think that this could have been some crazy misunderstanding? Or do you think that she really just left us in there to die? And why? So, to the lifeguard at that YMCA, please, let's not meet again. Huh? I asked, pulling off one side of my headphones. I said I like your boots, the man repeated. Oh, thank you. I had a bunch of pairs exactly like them for years and years. A good working boot, you know? They definitely are. I use them every day on the job. Where's that at? Turner Construction. Ah, yes. You're building that big old thing up on East Avenue, ain't you? Yes, sir. It's going to be one of the biggest in the city. So it seems. I used to do construction too, you know? That was way back in the day. I started back when your mama was probably a toddler. Oh yeah? With a company or freelance or... My papa had a small construction and carpentry business. He hired me when I was, maybe 15 or so. That was all the way back in 1962. We built houses, mostly a couple small apartment complexes, nothing as big as what you're working on. Did you like it? Boy, you bet your ass I did. Working all day was a free gym membership. Ha! Plus, all the perks that came with it. Perks? He smiled. Can you keep a secret, boy? Yes, sir. You ever play in a construction site as a child? When I was a little one, me and my buddies would sneak into houses being built and explore them. Maybe break a couple bottles here and there. Yeah, my neighbors and I used to do that when I was a kid. My house was one of the first built in our neighborhood, then the rest came later. We probably explored every house on the block before they were finished. When they were just wood skeletons, maybe breaking a couple bottles too, to tell you the truth. Of course you did. Who wouldn't, given the opportunity? But that's all the childish stuff. The real perks came later in life when I was an adult. Oh? Oh yes, boy. Imagine this. The year is 1980 with no cell phones in sight. You talk up a pretty lady at the local bar and hit it off. You tell her about your new construction project and she wants to go see it. Uh-huh. Well, then you take her there. You and her all alone in a skeleton of a home, as you said. Wouldn't it be a little more private back at your own house? More private, sure, maybe, but much messier. I paused. How so? Well, you don't just take a girlie down to a construction site at night just to get your diddly fiddled with. You take her for, you know. No, I don't know. For the easy disposal, boy. Disposal? You cut the girlie up or do whatever your preference is. You do whatever you want to do with her, and you put her under the house. You bury her in your stained clothes under there too. Once the job's done, no one will ever see that stuff again. It's gone. Eventually, a brand new house is sitting on top of your deed. The bus rolled to a stop. Well, this is my stop. He stood, patted my shoulder, and I recoiled. He walked off the bus. The only thing running through my mind was a memory. I was a kid,
no older than 6. My friends and I were playing hide and seek. I hid in the crawl space under my front porch, and when I was hiding, I found a pair of boots half buried in the dirt. The exact same type of boots I was wearing then on the bus. The exact same type of boots we'd found in the crawl spaces of every house in our neighborhood.
I think I found a hidden camera in my friend's bathroom. I'm staying at my friend's house for the weekend to spend time with him while he's back from college. He currently lives with his family, mom, dad, and younger sister. While I was using the bathroom, I looked over to the right and noticed a black square adapter plugged into the wall facing me directly. I looked closer and noticed a black hole in the middle, kind of looking like a camera. I don't know if it's exactly a camera or just a small hidden LED light to show if something is charging. I then noticed it was connected to a cord, leading it to what looks like a white charging block, but I honestly don't know what it could be, LOL. If it's a camera, it definitely caught me staring at it and taking photos, so I'm a bit nervous. Plus, I'm female. It's scary to think someone could be recording me and could be posting it online for some money. I know he's not the type of person to stalk on somebody, but also he hasn't even been home for that long, so I think it might be his father's. I want to bring it up and ask about it, but I want to make sure that I'm not overreacting. I'm currently still here at his house and waiting for my roommate to pick me up to take me home. I currently don't have a car. If I did, I'd be gone by now. But she's aware of the situation and is just as interested as me and scared. I do have one issue. When I woke up to use the bathroom, I passed by the father's mother's room, and noticed what looks like a frantically thrown around room with cords all over the bed. I may just be overlooking, and this could be someone looking for their charger, but again, I felt like it was important to say this. The back of the adapter had a weird set of numbers with Power Adapter Model S3 on top of it. When I put those words onto Google, it did come up recommended search for camera. So again, I don't know if I'm just overlooking everything simply because I'm paranoid. Another misunderstanding? It was in the bathroom facing directly to the side of me, but did show the whole shower. Meaning if this is a camera, it's been recording people taking showers, not just taking shits. Some back info on the family. My friend that I've known for a very long time is fully gay. And there's mostly women in this house all of the time when my friend isn't here in college. Unless he's snooping on his father, but I really doubt it. But I honestly think it's more likely the father. He does give me weird vibes. And as for the younger sister, I think she's 15. So if this is a camera, I will be infuriated. Yes, because I was recorded, but the moment I see others were, especially the younger sister, I won't be able to shut my mouth when it comes to confrontation. And yes, the family knew ahead of time I was visiting. I don't have an Android phone, but my mom does, so I'll probably use hers, LOL, and see if I can detect the camera. Lastly, when I took the adapter, I also took the cords connected to it and the white block connected to the cord. I finally left. And guys, it's a camera. I took off the sticker on the back of the adapter, and there's an SD card. When I popped out the SD card, there's a word written on it. It's a 32 GB as well. I'm freaked out. So, yes, we found proof of it being a camera and saw the footage on the camera with an SD reader you plug into your phone. I told my friend, and he decided to tell his mother to ask on what to do, and she was completely distraught. She immediately contacted a friend who happens to be a lawyer for some advice, and she advised we take it to the authorities, and we are planning to. While browsing the footage, we noticed it wasn't anything too revealing. And yes, I know it's still illegal to record anyone without their permission or knowledge, but it still helped us to deal with everything a bit better. My friend decided to confront his father about it, but he admits a friend from his job loaned it to him a year ago, but quickly quit the company after suing the company after an injury and fleeing the country after receiving his money. Now we're currently trying to find proof that this exchange ever happened, and it could actually be this man knowingly gave an older man with a younger daughter and a son a hidden camera to capture them and maybe sell them online. Now, as for what's on the card was over 70 videos, different amounts of footage and folders. Only one folder had the videos, but there was a WhatsApp folder that was empty, which was weird. A lot of it was black, just showing the candle burning all day. But it did capture people using the bathroom. I try to keep updating it as I go, but it's a lot to uncover for me. I'm still in denial about this, so I'm just going on my own pace as well as my friend's family. My friend said his dad was really upset once he was told his daughter, wife, and son was possible recorded. So I don't know. Take that as you will.
My life has always been unconventional. I lost my entire family at a young age, my brother and myself being the only survivors of a terrible car accident. Our only relative that was not in the accident, our mother's sister, refused to take us in and basically disowned us. We were sent to a state-run facility, not a foster family. I was separated from my brother and never saw him again. I never again felt the comfort of a loving home or a supportive shoulder to cry on. I lived in the facility until I was 18. They constantly put us down, made us feel like we were nothing, and I believed it. I was already very plain-looking and didn't have much to offer anyone. Because of my trauma, I was very much a doormat in life and allowed people to walk all over me. I didn't have much luck in love until a man named John came into my life. He was a lawyer and very wealthy. He said he also grew up in the facility I did, also an orphan. I believed him. He proposed awfully quickly, and even though I wasn't sure how I felt about him, I was never one to use the word no with anyone. We didn't even have a wedding, not that two orphans would have anyone to invite to one anyway. We moved into a large condo, and I had everything a girl could want, I guess. But John was never home. He was always working, always coming home late at night and leaving before I woke up. He didn't like it when I went out alone and we had enough money that I didn't need to work, but I was starting to get very bored. We had a cook and a maid, so there wasn't much for me to do at home. I began to wonder if he was having an affair, if he only married me to appear as if he was a family man for his job, but secretly wanted to sleep around. He must be sleeping with somebody because he certainly wasn't doing it with me. Is this what marriage is like for other girls? I never had a mother or friends to share stories with, to compare my life to. I only had TV and the media's idea of what a happy marriage should be, and mine didn't look like that either. One day, the maid screamed from downstairs and came storming out of a very small broom closet. She was cursing and speaking in a mixture of English and her first language, so I couldn't understand everything, but she was very upset and scared. She marched right outside the door and never came back. I asked John about it when he finally came home that night, but he just said she had an emergency. The next day, we had a new maid. Now, this started to really bother me. I went in and out of that broom closet multiple times the next day. It was very tiny and there was nothing inside, just cleaning supplies. I was just starting to think that maybe she took her phone calls in there for privacy or to not get in trouble for talking on the phone during work when I spotted something. Hinges. On the wall. Why would a wall need hinges? I began feeling around them and there was a small space between the wall and the adjacent wall. This wasn't a wall, this was a door. I began running my hands over every inch of the wall, looking for some sort of handle. When I could not find one, I began banging and pushing. Sure enough, it was a door. It popped open when I applied pressure in just the right spot. I was staring down a small staircase, only about 5 or 6 stairs, that led into a much larger room. I clicked the light on and began making my way down. I didn't even hesitate. The smell that hit me as I descended was overwhelming. What greeted me was a large room filled with cages. Large cages. They looked like prison cells and they were bare. As I was staring in horror at this bizarre room I had no idea was below my home, I heard movement. Before I could react, a figure stood up from inside one of the cages. He had disheveled long hair and an unkempt beard. His eyes were wide and crazy, and his shirt was long and covered in filth. He screamed. I gasped and turned around to run back up the stairs, close that wall, back to my normal boring home, and never think about this place again when his words made me stop in my tracks. Please, don't run. I need help. I stopped and swore at myself and my inability to say no. Please, I don't think the other lady's coming back. I turned around. What other lady? I asked, but I knew the answer, of course. The other lady who found me yesterday. She accidentally found me and she promised she would go to the police, but he probably killed her too. What do you mean killed her too? I practically screeched. That man, he's crazy. He took my wife and I months ago. He tortured us. He barely feeds us. What? Wife? I asked, looking around and seeing all the other cages were empty. He killed her right at the start. She couldn't take the beating. She was too loud. Please, please, my name is Mark. I'm probably on the news. I don't know how you found me, but you better get to the police before he finds you. He will kill you too. I can't. Why not? Because that man is my husband. A silence fell over the room. At first, he shrunk back away from the bars and cowered, as if I was going to hurt him as well. Oh, no, I'm not in on whatever this is. I had no idea. I thought he was being a man whore, not doing whatever this is. Oh man, this is really bad. What do I do? It was as if the severity of the situation finally hit me. My husband wasn't cheating. He was a serial killer. He was keeping innocent people underneath our home and doing God knows what to them before ending their lives. You have to call the police. You won't get in trouble if you weren't involved. I can vouch for you. I've never seen you down here before. You've never used the stick. The stick? Oh no, I don't want to know. Listen, that lady is now gone because she found you. I'll be gone too if I run to the police. Trust me, I do not condone what my husband is doing. I will get you out of here, but I need time to plan and do it right. If I make a mistake, we're both dead, understand? If he was capable of all this right under my nose, then I'm not sure what else he would do. What he would do to me. But it's Mark, right? Mark, I promise you I will get you out. We will go together. In the meantime, I will bring you some food and a towel. Some comforts. Whatever I can before he gets home. But before I can safely get us out, we both pretend this never happened. Got it? Please, I can't do another night in here. What's your name? Molly. Please, trust me. I need to think first. I'll be back. I turned to go and I could hear his desperate pleas. Wait, Molly, please, wait! I shut the wall of the broom closet behind me and took some deep breaths. This was so much to process. Am I just as bad if I don't get him out right now? Am I abiding a criminal? How could I not have realized I was married to a psycho? I went to make food for Mark and grab some things that might make his time in that cage be more bearable. I didn't want the new maid seeing me go into the broom closet, and I certainly didn't want John to see me. Although he would never come home this early, I carefully retreated back into the room. Mark was relieved I came back, but also still begging for me to let him out now. I almost broke, but I realized I didn't have a key. John must have it. I assured Mark I would get the key from John, and the second I did, we were out of here. Both of us. I started looking for the key and trying to act perfectly normal during the few hours I actually saw John. We did spend Sundays together, if by together you mean we sit in the same room doing separate things, but this Sunday, for the first time since we married, I did not mind it at all. I began spending my days with Mark as the weeks went by. I had been so lonely that I loved having someone to talk to. As I kept bringing him food and other necessities, he began to trust me and open up to me. He told me about his life and his wife. He started telling me stories and interesting facts he knew. After a while, I could almost forget he was a prisoner in my husband's twisted human zoo, that he could be up for slaughter any day. I tried to block that part out. But just when I was starting to have some very confusing feelings about Mark, he began to beg for his freedom again. I felt bad. I'd been so happy to have someone to talk to that I almost forgot to look for the key. But if I let Mark go, I might not ever see him again, let alone get to spend time with him. I think he realized something was up when my expression fell when he reminded me to get the key. You are upset about helping me? No. I really enjoy talking with you. I was thinking that I'll probably never get to talk to you again after we leave. Why not? Well, I just assumed... Wait, what are you saying? I'm saying, Molly, we're not going to stop talking unless you want to, but I thought leaving here is the beginning of our new lives together. I was beaming. There were butterflies on my stomach. Was this what love felt like? I will get that key tonight, I promised. When John came home, I began to take a closer look at him. I had searched the entire condo, top to bottom, and no key. I watched him come in, put his car keys on the table, and head to the bedroom to get changed. The key was not on his regular key set. I had already checked. He must keep it on him at all times. To get what I wanted, I had to give him something he'd never asked me for. I had never initiated sex with John, and he never brought it up or tried with me either. Not even on our wedding night. But I crept into the bedroom as he was changing and began rubbing his back. What are you doing, Molly? He asked, blushing and shocked. You must have had a hard day at work. Shouldn't a wife help her husband relax? You don't have to. But I want to, I shouted and attempted to seduce my husband for the first time, and hopefully the last. I felt nothing for this man that never took an interest in me, that never took me anywhere, that never even asked me anything about myself. Talking to Mark made me realize what love could feel like, and it was not settling. I wanted to be with Mark. I loved him even as a scraggly man locked in a cage. I would love him as anything, anywhere. John passed out right away after, but it hadn't taken very long. I had hoped my first time would be with Mark, but this was a small price to pay for freedom. I found a set of keys in a secret pocket in his pants. I hurried downstairs as quietly as I could, trying to hold back my excitement. I came running into the room Mark was locked in. He shot up quickly when he saw me come in so late. "Did you get them?" he asked, hopeful. I nodded and went to open his cage when I heard my name being screamed and shouted upstairs. "Oh no," I said. "Give me a moment." "No. He probably found out." Mark reached his hand out. "Give me the keys and I'll get help. I trusted you when you asked me. Can't you trust me back?" I thought for a moment, scared if he had the power instead of me, that he might not wait for me. He might not go with me. But I guess that's the risk. That's how I'll know. If he comes back for me or waits, then he really does love me as well. "Okay, here. But before you go, I love you, Mark. Please don't leave me here with him." "Never." He grinned at me. So I gave him the keys and then went running back upstairs where my husband was frantically looking for me. "I'm right here," I said, peering back into the bedroom. "Did you take my keys?" he demanded. "What keys?" I asked. There was a pause and a terrifying moment where he just stared into my eyes like he was trying to scan my face for information or burn it out of me with his stare. "Molly," he began, "what do you know?" "Nothing," I said at first. There was a loud clang of metal coming from downstairs, and I realized in my haste I hadn't shut the wall to the secret room. "The jig is up, isn't it?" he asked. Finally, with the confidence I didn't know I had, I smiled back at him. "It is," I said, finally. "Molly," he shouted, not with anger but pure fear. "You don't know what you've done." "I know my husband has been lying to me and murders people, so I think I know exactly what I'm doing. How could you, John? How could you have people locked under our house? He's a criminal, Molly." Dead silence. "What?" I finally said meekly. "I'm not what you think I am. Look." He pulls his wallet up and opens up to a badge and an ID card. FBI. Undercover. "What? I don't understand." "I'm sorry, Molly. Our marriage was a sham. I needed someone to be my wife while I was in deep cover. I'm on a case, Molly. I'm not a lawyer. That's my cover story. I'm trying to solve some of the most horrific murders this area has ever seen. Mark is my suspect. I had him here trying to get answers. He has committed some of the worst atrocities I have ever seen in my life. I'm sorry I lied to you, Molly. I was going to come clean and start over with you. I was told not to get attached, but I was actually falling in love with you, Malls. I promise. I could never murder anyone." "But, what about his wife? He said you tortured them and killed her." "What wife? Mark isn't married. He killed his girlfriend and his unborn child still inside of her." "Oh, God." I felt dizzy. I was going to throw up. "It's okay, Malls. Just give me back the keys, then I can explain everything. I have all the case files. We can start over." "Molly? Molly? Molly, why are you looking at me like that?" Where are the keys, Molly? Where are the keys?" He began to panic, and so did I. Before I had a chance to respond or react, I saw Mark through the mirror above the dresser. He was grinning ear to ear and holding a gun. "I promised I wouldn't leave without you. A promise is a promise. I always knew I was going to die of a broken heart." Some people are terrified of going on the dark web. Most people wouldn't even know where to begin. But me? I've gotten way too comfortable searching the bowels of the deep web and its darkest corners of depravity. I work as a fence of sorts, taking advantage of most people's technical ineptitude. I make a profit from selling illicit items to folks in my hometown. Once upon a time, I got these things from other sources, but nowadays you can get anything, and I mean anything, delivered to your door with the click of a mouse. It's cheap and surprisingly reliable. There's no such thing as morals when you have a job like I do, selling all manner of questionable items. I guess because of that, you could argue I deserved what happened to me. I was sitting in my home office, feeling bored and lonely. Having a 2-story, 4-bedroom house with a giant backyard is kind of pointless when you have nobody to share it with, and the thought occurred to me again that I should get a dog. People on Instagram and Facebook had dogs, and they all looked content and happy with their lives, out in the sun playing frisbee and rolling around on blankets in the grass. Why couldn't that be me? It had been a while since I had a real girlfriend too, so the thought of using the pooch as an icebreaker for talking to women also crossed my mind. I got up the courage to finally do it, then and there deciding to get a puppy that I could raise up to be a loyal and faithful companion to share my big house, which felt so empty. Without really thinking about it, I did what I always did when I wanted to buy something. I opened the Tor browser on my laptop and went to my favorite illicit site. For some reason, the idea of going to a normal website or to a breeder or pet store didn't cross my mind until later. In retrospect, that would have made a lot more sense. I typed in dog in the search bar, but only one ad came up. I clicked on it. Puppy for sale, purebred Southern Wolfhound, $500 USD. Will deliver. There was a picture of a very cute little black dog. I had never heard of a Southern Wolfhound before. It didn't look like one I had ever seen. Then again, I don't know much about dogs. Not being one for shopping around, I punched in my credit card info and clicked the buy button. A few days later, a wide-eyed and nervous-looking delivery man knocked on my door. At his feet sat an oversized dog crate that was pitch black inside. Nothing could be seen within it. His trembling hands passed me a tablet and I signed for the delivery and brought the heavy crate into my house. The dog was a lively one, I thought to myself. When I picked up the crate, it started moving restlessly inside, feeling more like a giant python than a puppy. Its weight didn't seem to match what I had seen in the picture. I wondered briefly if there had been some sort of shipping mistake and almost ran back after the delivery guy. But when I opened it up, there it was, an adorable black puppy that wandered out hesitantly and then ran over to me. My fears were instantly assuaged as the little scamp began to lick my face and I fell on my back laughing. I let it jump up on me and we rolled around and played on the floor for a while. A smile stretched wide across my face and I felt truly happy as I played with the little dog. I took the puppy around the house for a tour, showing him the upstairs first, my bedroom, and the office. He sniffed around the guest room I never used and another that was for storage. I showed him the basement and the little bed I had bought for him. He didn't seem particularly interested in it. The strangest thing about the puppy was his weight. He was a hefty little guy. When I tried to pick him up, he weighed a ton, and it didn't make sense. The more I thought about it, the more it made me feel uncomfortable and jittery, like the dog was a hole in the universe leading to unreality. A black hole leading to some other dark place that I didn't want to see. Trying not to dwell too much on that, mostly because it made my brain feel like it was going to turn into scrambled eggs if I did, I decided to take my new puppy out for a walk at the park. I tried to put the leash on him that I had recently bought, but it never seemed to fasten quite right. It was like the collar was too small for him. But it wasn't. I could see that clearly. My mind felt fragmented and wrong as I struggled with it, seeing two realities for a split second. In one reality, I could see my puppy. The other image was like a piece of rogue glass in a shattered mirror, revealing a tremendous wolf-like hound. Its fur was missing in places, bone and exposed muscle peeking out from between its haunches and ribs. The beast's ancient, knowing face was full of sharp teeth, bared and snarling at me. Wise, experienced eyes stared through my soul, milky white with cataracts.
Dirt was all over the hound, and old blood like it had been digging in a graveyard. Soon we were walking down the street to the park despite the fact I had no memory of leaving my house. The puppy was back to being a puppy, and he was off the leash, I noticed. Still, he seemed to be managing well enough. He was staying close by me and was quick to respond when I called to him. It was as if he was already well trained despite his young age. So I decided to just continue on and kept walking towards the park with him. It was a Tuesday afternoon and it was quiet outside. I didn't see anyone until we got there. Once we got to the park, I saw a few other people were out walking with their dogs in the large open space. It was a huge grassy field, and people would often let their dogs off leash despite the official rules to the contrary. So I didn't feel as out of place with the pup roaming free there, as I had been walking down the street with him. At first, nobody noticed us, but then the dogs picked up the puppy's scent one by one. They perked up their ears and stood stock still, staring at us. They appeared terrified. My little pup, who I hadn't even had time to name yet, began to run towards them. I saw the stunned faces of the dog's owners. Their jaws dropped and they looked suddenly horrified for some reason. I didn't understand it. My dog was just a little puppy. They turned and began to flee. What were they so afraid of, I wondered, chasing after the little guy. And then it happened again. A little piece of my life went missing. One second I was there in the park running after the dog. The next we were back home again. It was as if I had just lost the last little bit of my life. It seemed like just a second before we had been in the park and I had been calling after my puppy as he ran away from me, chasing after him. But now we were back in my living room watching television, an old rerun of The Office on Netflix. Pulling out my cell phone, I checked the time. It was 4:30 p.m. More than 2 hours had passed. I looked down to see the puppy was at my feet, sleeping soundly. At least he was safe, but that didn't make the blackout I had just experienced feel any better. What happened, boy? I asked the dog as if he would be able to tell me. He just kept snoring, and I noticed there was blood on his paws and on his face. Feeling more scared than I had been in a long time, I tried to recall what had happened. Nothing came back to me, no matter how hard I searched my memories. This had never happened before, and it really frightened me. I hoped my memories would come back to me, but they never did. Worse yet, over the following weeks, it happened again and again, the blackouts. Every time I left the house with the dog, my life would seem to disappear. Time would disappear. I would step out the door, then find myself immediately back inside with hours missing from my day. The blank periods would get longer and longer, and after a couple of weeks, I was up to missing 8-hour chunks from my life, which I could remember no details from. It seemed to always be when I left the house, so I started doing that less and less, hiding indoors and never leaving my home. I ordered my groceries delivery and became a hermit. The puppy seemed content though, and he was growing at a rapid pace. Despite the fact that we spent all hours together, even I could notice the changes. Overnight, he seemed to sprout up a couple inches, and every morning I would see he was bigger than before. When I looked at the dog, every worry I had about the missing fragments of my life disappeared. Only the puppy mattered. He was what was most important. The warmth I felt when I was holding him and how he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered to him as well. Eventually, my friends started to get concerned about me. My old buddy Tom called, saying he hadn't seen me in a while. I told him I was fine. I just didn't want to leave the house because I had a new puppy. Telling him the truth didn't occur to me, but maybe I should have. Maybe I could have prevented what happened next. I didn't ask Tom to come over. He just stopped by one evening a day or two after our phone call. We were such good friends that he didn't even wait for me to answer after knocking on the door. He just walked in. The dog had grown considerably by that point. He stood up at attention when Tom walked in, and the wolfhound immediately bolted for the front door. My old friend was halfway through saying hello before he began to scream. Again, the world fragmented and split, and I saw two versions of my dog. One of them was the cute little guy I knew and loved. The other was the decaying graveyard hellhound I had glimpsed before, massive and mangy, missing bits of flesh and fur and eager to attack. Before Tom had a chance to run, my dog was on him. The hellhound was on him. He jumped up on him, knocking him to the ground.
Quickly, he was on his neck with his paws and ripped the flesh from his face while he screamed and clawed at the door, trying to escape. I ran over to pull the dog off my old friend. When I reached out to grab him to try to stop him as he tore muscle from bone and gouged out Tom's eyes with his teeth, he snapped at me. The sharp teeth scraped off my fingers, and I looked down horrified to see a glimpse of my own shiny white phalanges staring back at me, hair-covered knuckle flesh dangling limply from the exposed bone. I recoiled from him, screaming, and ran. Tom was already dead by the time I got upstairs. His screams cut short as the evil wolf ripped out his larynx. Slamming the door to my office shut behind me, I locked the door. I'm back in my office where all this started. I'm terrified to go back out that door. Now that the hellhound has a taste of my flesh, I doubt that he'll be able to resist. I can hear him sniffing and scratching outside already, hungry again after consuming every last bit of my oldest and best friend. There wasn't much to do other than wait for my inevitable demise, so I decided to browse the dark web again. I wanted to see something. I went back to the same hidden site again, navigating through a series of back doors to get there, clicking secret icons hidden in obscure websites. Once I arrived there, I typed the word dog into the search bar again. The same exact ad came up, identical. Puppy for sale, purebred, Southern Wolfhound, $500 US. Will deliver. This time I decided to send a direct message to the seller, someone named Lycan. User 53. Hey, I bought one of your dogs and it just killed my friend. I'm pretty sure it's eating my memories too. Lycan, the creature you have purchased is no dog. It is a Vrykolakus, an undead creature which sustains itself on flesh and blood like a werewolf zombie, kinda. User 53. Sounds more like a zombie werewolf to me. Can I please have a refund? Lycan. No. All sales are final. Lycan has exited the chat. With that, he disappeared back into the ether and left me with the beast scratching at my door, trying to get in. It won't be long before he gets through the door, I'm sure. And when he gets in, I'm not sure what he'll do. But I've got a pretty good idea.
My 6-year-old daughter, Jane, has recently started to enjoy playing hide and seek. At first, I thought it was cute. Jane had always enjoyed games like this, so I didn't think much of it. I figured that it was something she had played at school and thought she'd be bored of it by the end of the week. Kids are always finding new ways to entertain themselves, so it wasn't unusual when she started asking to play. I thought that it was something fun that we could do together, and I wanted to promote her creativity. It wouldn't take me long to find her anyway, as she was notorious for attempting to hide in plain sight. Jane really liked hide and seek, though, and never seemed to get weary of it. So, for the next 2 months, it became sort of routine. Aside from the longevity, it was nothing to be concerned about. That was until today, when I came home from work. I walked in through our garage and saw our nanny, Sue, frantic that she couldn't find Jane. Of course, this panicked me, so I asked Sue when she last saw Jane. She told me that Jane had wanted to play hide and seek, like usual, so she turned her back and counted to 10 while Jane hid. When she turned around, Jane was gone. Sue said she looked under the couch, in the bedrooms, and under the beds, behind doors, and multiple other places. This went on for almost 30 minutes, and she still couldn't find her. Sue then told me that she had called out to Jane, telling her she wins and to come out from her hiding spot, but Jane never came out. So, thinking that Jane hadn't heard her, she continued to look and call her name. After an hour had passed, though, Sue began to panic. She ran throughout the house, yelling for Jane and telling her it wasn't funny anymore. No response. I even asked Sue if she had possibly heard movement or giggling, something to give away Jane's hiding spot, but she said no. At this point, Sue was in tears, profusely apologizing and practically gagging on her words. I felt awful that my daughter had done this. She had never misbehaved in this way, and she loved Sue too much to make her worry. So I gathered my composure and assured her that Jane had to be in the house. She's too short to unlock the doors to go outside, and told her we could look together. We must have looked for hours, in and under every place a child could hide or fit, when I finally remembered a spot that Sue would never think to look. It was Jane's closet, in the far back behind the clothes. In the bottom right corner, there was a little door that had once been used as a dumbwaiter. I forgot that it even existed, but I rushed to Sue and told her, gasping between words. We ran to Jane's room and frantically pulled the closet door open, almost taking it off its hinges. I dropped to my knees, shoved a mound of clothes to the right, and there it was. Right in front of us was the door to the dumbwaiter. It was painted over with a coat of white paint, but you could still see the dark outline square in the wall. The silence between Sue and I was deafening. I knew we were both fearing the worst. I called out to Jane, told her that it was time to stop hiding now, but there was no response. I slowly reached for the handle, my heart beating so loud I could hear it in my ears, and slid the door open. Inside was Jane, but it was a horrifying discovery. Her body was contorted and mangled, her knees each bent at a 90-degree angle so her feet touched the top of the dumbwaiter, her arms twisted grotesquely between them. Her long hair fell around her face and body, only her eyes visible through the strands, and her fingernails were bleeding from digging them into the wood. Sue and I fell back in sync with each other, terrified, unable to grasp what we were witnessing. After a moment, Sue said that she must have been in shock, possibly from broken bones, so she began to stand up to call an ambulance. It was then, when Sue moved, that Jane started to scream. It was a shrill, animalistic scream, like a deer that's been hit by a car and left to die. Despite this, Sue managed to stand up and find her cell phone to call an ambulance. It wasn't until she returned that the screaming stopped. I thought that maybe Jane had passed out from the pain, so I slowly scooted my way towards her. I must have only moved a few inches when I saw her eyes locked on me, unblinking and glazed over. I called her name gently, but something inside of me told me not to go near her. I wanted to console her, but I was scared of her. I was scared of my own daughter. It must have been about 5 minutes before I heard the sound of the ambulance outside the house. Flashes of red shined through the window of Jane's room, and a wave of relief washed over me. I looked back over at Jane, but instead saw the door of the dumbwaiter closing and the top of Jane's head going down. I jumped towards it and managed to stop it at the last second, my hand between the door and the inside of the dumbwaiter. I yelled to Sue to go downstairs and get the medics when a sharp pain suddenly shot through my index finger. I screamed and pulled my hand away, a trail of blood flowing on the floor. I then watched as the dumbwaiter door closed and could hear Jane giggling as she was being lowered down. But I had soon forgotten about that, as the agonizing pain in my finger quickly became unbearable. I brought my hand up slowly to where I could see it and unwrapped my other hand from it. I almost passed out from the sight. Half of my index finger had been reduced to a stub. It had been bitten off right at the joint. I felt the blood swelling up inside, throbbing against the skin. I then heard Sue coming running in, alerting the medics down the hall to come quickly. I tried to tell her about Jane, to tell the medics to check the basement for her, but I could barely get my first word out before everything went dark. I don't remember much after that, only that I woke up in the hospital, which is where I am now. The police came and went about an hour ago. They questioned Sue and I separately, then told me that the only evidence they'd found was a broken window in the basement, my blood on the bedroom floor, and the other half of my finger in the dumbwaiter. No sign of Jane in the house or outside, even with the help of police dogs. So, as of right now, she's been marked as a missing person. I could tell by their tone that they're not too hopeful of finding her, but I know she's out there somewhere. That simple thought alone terrifies me, and I can't stop myself from thinking that this is still a game of hide and seek to her, a bigger one, with more people to play. So if you see her, maybe in the woods or in your house somewhere, take my warning. Don't play hide and seek with her.
So my brand new water heater broke down from all the calcium and things in the water, and so we rented a hotel room so we could all get a shower. My hubby and teenage daughters had gone first. While they took their shower, I had already been looking for cameras after shows and articles depicting warnings to check had me freaked out. My husband had laughed at me, so I thought we were safe. It wasn't until I was actually standing inside the shower that I saw the camera. You had to see it from a certain angle wrapped around the light that had a cover over the bottom of it, but an opening all the way around the edges in the middle. I looked up and there it was. I screamed and my hubby came running in. I told him where it was, and he checked, and sure enough, he took the bottom cover off and the camera fell down and was actually wired to the light and set to sit and point looking down into the shower. My husband ripped it out and marched straight to the office, and from there a fight ensued. The creepy guy got pissed my husband was destroying his room, and the owner called the cops. Well, my hubby is a hothead when he's on a moral mission and grabbed the guy up by the scruff of his collar. His mentality being, if I'm going to jail, I'm going to make it worth it. But the guy's wife came out, and by then I was dressed in there for backup, and she wanted to know what was happening. So I told her what happened. She said, wait right here. She had grabbed a knife from her room and was chasing the owner guy around with it when the cops showed up. The cops asked us what happened first. When we told them, they took the owner in and apparently found hundreds of videos in a private nook in his bedroom they're using to build a case on him with. So beware to check everywhere before ever undressing in a hotel. 32. That's how many teeth you should have as an adult, Bradley, I told my latest patient, a scared 6-year-old boy that was trying his best not to pee his pants while shaking like a leaf in my chair. Being a dentist, I was used to seeing children afraid of me. It's become something of a stigma I've tried to overcome, albeit unsuccessfully. No matter how many lollipops I pass out or playful ties I wear, they still enter and leave my office in complete terror. Bradley's mother was not the patient type. She was trying to schedule a hair appointment at the mall and coordinate with a babysitter on her smartphone while I checked her son's first molars. It wasn't easy. The kid was squirming at least 90% of the time, and his inattentive mom was not helping. Let's just say I got fed up fast. It just got worse when I realized that one of his baby teeth was loosening on the right side. I had my nurse come in to check and realized that it would probably be safer to pull it than to let it fall out on its own. I'm sorry. It's just there could be a slight infection if we don't operate, I told his mom. To say that she was irate would likely be an understatement. You people are just trying to get more bang for your buck. I never needed to go to the dentist for little things like this when I was little, and I know that this won't be covered by insurance, she squealed. The fact that she was more concerned about her pocketbook than her son's welfare got under my skin a little bit. Miss Garland, you must understand. We're only trying to do what is best for Bradley, I said in a soft-spoken tone, but she wouldn't listen to me. She left my office without us ever getting a chance to finish the surgery, and I was forced to work through the rest of my day with Bradley's toothache circling my mind. I really felt bad for the kid. I knew her type all too well. She would try to find a second opinion, maybe even switch dentists, or probably not even bother to go to anyone and just wait until it became a real emergency. It was ridiculous. But what was I supposed to do? Natalie, my nurse, had an idea. You should call Nana Carol, she said once we closed up shop for the night. She was referring to my eccentric grandma, who among other things fancied herself as a practitioner of the occult and friends with shady people in the area. I blinked as I slid the blinds down. That's a bad idea. You remember what happened last time? I said. Last time she gave me something to make a young girl calm during a procedure, and it wound up with her in the hospital. I almost lost my license. It made me want to never speak to my grandmother again. I was terrified of her. I told Natalie that it wasn't going to happen. Carol was a loose cannon, but still, her suggestion weighed on my mind the entire night, especially because I wasn't sure I had other choices. The next day, I tried to call Miss Garland to change her mind, but got the same song and dance. Oh, sure, she had calmed down a little and claimed she would think about it, but I could tell by the way she was distracted my recommendation was getting me nowhere. The kid would likely suffer for weeks with a bad tooth because of his stingy mom. So I changed course and drove to my grandmother's. I have to admit, I didn't want to go. I hadn't seen her in years after all, but that was because of how strange she could be. Grandma Carol was not a friendly lady. She kept to herself and ran a small fortune teller and palm reading business that helped keep her lights on. I guess the thing I should mention first about her is that she didn't just do it for the money, though.
She really believed she could contact spirits on the other side. The small fee she charged was only meant to help her keep going so she could help other people. Of course, I didn't believe in all that witchcraft, but I know that Graham knew her stuff when it came to the old ways, so I figured that if I needed something to convince a client, she would be the one to help me. I know it sounds outlandish, but she actually helped once before when I needed some help. I didn't ask questions. All I knew was that someone got hurt, and I was angry with myself. I should know for sure what my grandma is capable of, but all this weird behavior was too creepy for me to dare ask.
Kyle, you always come to me for something when you've got nowhere else to turn, she said dryly. I could tell despite the early hours she was already drunk. Probably had stayed up all night. It's about a kid, I explained, and then told her the whole story. Grandma was listening and checking her little black book and muttered, "So you need to basically get the mom to give you what you want, right?" "Yes, and not so many words," I muttered. I was growing uncomfortable as I realized this was a dangerous request. I had no idea again what Carol might do to fulfill it. "I can do it, but this is going to be the last time. I can't anymore, Kyle. This business is too much for me," she told me. "What exactly are you going to do?" I whispered. She smiled wickedly. "Let's just say they'll get a visit from the Tooth Fairy," she responded. A shudder went down my spine. I considered telling her to call it off, but I was more concerned about Bradley. He needed all the help he could get. I told Grandma I appreciated it and left to go to work. I told Natalie the plan and tried to work through my normal clientele without thinking about Grams. Then, as the day ended, I saw a small Ziploc bag on the doormat filled with baby teeth. There had to be at least 10 of them. Grandma's bizarre words rang in my head. I tried to call her to see what had happened, but all I got was a busy tone. Something told me something was wrong, so I checked my records to determine if these teeth were already in my records. If it was for Bradley, I doubted it would come up since he was a new client, but the way these teeth looked, they were mangled and bent. It told me that the child was likely in excruciating pain from the procedure. How had Carol even gotten these? I dropped everything and left to go to Bradley's home. I know it was the stupidest thing to go there and check on them, but I had already likely bothered these people enough, so it's not like it could get worse from here. I was wrong. I saw the police lights from almost 3 blocks away. 7 patrol cars were outside their house. I slowed down and considered turning around when one of the officers flagged me down and was about to tell me to do so, and I casually asked what had happened. "It appears to be a murder-suicide. The mother killed herself by mutilating her mouth and using a carving knife to take out her son's entire set of teeth," the cop said softly as he shook his head, clearly shaken by what he had seen. I knew that it wasn't actually the mother at all, but I kept quiet as they kept telling us what had happened. "She wrote the most bizarre note, too. Said there was a visit from the Tooth Fairy," he said. My blood ran cold. I thanked him and left the scene. I drove to Carol's next. I slammed on the door, demanding answers from the old hag. "You killed that boy!" I screamed as I shoved inside the small office. "It was an accident, of course. I wanted only to get his teeth, but they put up a fight," Carol said. She didn't seem intimidated by my irate behavior. Instead, she told me she had something to show me. We walked to the back room and I saw rows and rows of more teeth in bags on display. Showing me that she was using these human teeth as a way to earn money on dentures, I realized the full extent of her villainy. She didn't care she had cost a child their life, only that she had made a profit off it. "I told you before, Kyle. What I do is like the Tooth Fairy," she said with a soft smile. "I never said that what I do was good."
My son James has always had a hard time making friends. He just finished the 2nd grade, and I was beginning to think that he might never really have a good friend. Then on the first day of summer, he proudly announced that the next-door neighbor's son, Henry, wanted to play hide-and-seek. I called his mom to make sure that was okay, and we set up a play date. We are in a small neighborhood, and I didn't see the harm, but she was hesitant. I explained to her that James was very shy, so the fact that he made a friend at all was really a miracle. "I don't want to mess this up," I told her. She reluctantly agreed. I told James that we would go over to let them play the very next day. He was so excited that he finally had a friend. He was grinning ear to ear. The boys ran across the street to the small playground and began to play as I got to know Henry's mom. "I'm sorry this is the first time we've made introductions," I told her. She claimed it was fine. She was constantly on her phone texting someone. I got the impression her mind was occupied. "So do you and your husband have any plans next weekend?" I asked. I wanted to try to keep things between Henry and James as easy as possible by being friendly. But she simply frowned and said, "I don't think we will be doing this again." I wasn't sure why she had such a cold demeanor, and before I could ask if I said something wrong, she called her son and they left. I stood up and shouted for James, but he didn't reply. He must still be hiding, I thought as I walked over to the playground and started to play along. "Come on, bud, we have to shower and then get ready for dinner," I told him. Still no response. I knelt down and looked in the long pipe that ran through the playground to see if he was in there, but all I saw was empty void. I began to panic, shouting for him to respond to me, but my son didn't even make a peep. I called my husband Joseph and told him the situation. "Beth, calm down. Go ask that neighbor kid if he knows where James would hide. It's probably just a case of our kid finding a really good hiding spot. He probably can't hear you because he left the playground." I was thankful he was managing to keep a level head. I went over to Henry's house and knocked on the door. His mother seemed irritated that I was there. "What is it now?" she snapped. Again, she was on the phone, texting away without even looking at me. "I'm sorry to bother you, but while Henry and James were playing, I guess James thought that the game was still going on when your son left. He's hiding somewhere nearby and I can't find him," I said. "So? What does that have to do with us?" she asked. "Does Henry have any idea where James might have gone?" She glared at me. "Are you accusing my son of something? If you can't find your kid, that's your fault. Now get off my porch before I call the police." I was flabbergasted by this behavior, and I did call the police, but for an entirely different reason. When they arrived, I told them the situation with my son, and I was trying my best to not sound like an overworked and stressed out mother. They canvassed the park but couldn't find my son anywhere. When Joseph got home, I told him about the neighbor and he became suspicious. They've been here for almost 5 years, and I don't recall any neighbor with a kid named Henry. "Something is up," he told me. He said he would go over to talk with the mom about it. An hour passed and he hadn't returned home, and I was beginning to feel uneasy again. It was nearly sunset. I walked over to the house and knocked on the door. The mother opened it, as usual, glued to her phone. Something snapped inside me, and I pushed the cell phone from her hands, forcing her to look at me. "My husband came over here to talk to you. Where is he now?" I asked angrily. She seemed to be amused by my rage. "Probably out playing hide and seek with your son," she laughed. "Give me back my phone now." "What could possibly be so important that you don't give two flips about other people?" I asked as I glanced at the messages she was sending. My heart dropped as I read them. "First package sent. Second package for you, unexpected. Pay for both and will release confirmation of assets." Below that were pictures of my son and my husband being held somewhere, tied down with ropes and tape on their mouths. "Jesus Christ," I said as I took a step back. My neighbor jumped me, and we fell into the street. I screamed at the top of my lungs, punching them and scratching at their eyes. I grabbed the phone and ran toward the playground. I texted whoever they were contacting, demanding that my family be released. My neighbor was about to throttle me again when I found a metal pipe and slammed it against the side of her head, knocking her unconscious. To show how serious I was to these kidnappers, I sent a picture of my neighbor. "I'll turn all this evidence over to the police, but if you let me have my family back, I won't say a thing," I told whoever was on the other end of the phone. At last, that got a response. "How about another game?" My heart sank. I dared to ask what game they wanted to play. Of course, it was hide and seek. "You hide." Then to my shock, a bullet zipped past my head. I ran into the neighbor's house and slammed the door closed as more bullets were shot into the house. I was sure other neighbors would surely call the police, but instead I was attacked for the next 10 minutes as I tried to hide in the house. More gunfire erupted as I passed by windows and ran upstairs. Her son was asleep, clearly unaware of whatever dirty job his mother was involved with. I decided to make a counteroffer to the kidnappers, sending a picture of her son. "Is this boy an asset for you? Do you use him to target other children? I will get him to the police unless you give my family back." 2 seconds later, the gunfire stopped. Then they texted back, "Find your family in the house in 2 minutes." I screamed out my husband's name, but no reply came. Then my neighbor appeared at the door as I went to the first floor. She was covered in blood, but clearly panicking. "This isn't what was supposed to happen. You have to let me get to my son," she begged. I stood in front of the stairs, feeling nothing but anger toward her. "You kidnapped a kid and forced him to play a game with other children just to sell them to human trafficking, and now you want me to believe you care?" I shouted. Her fake concern faded as soon as she realized I knew the truth. Then she screamed and pushed herself on top of me, tackling me at the bottom of the stairs as I heard a countdown on the phone get closer to 0. "You have no idea how hard it's been for me. This is all I know. These people are ruthless!" she shrieked. I used the phone to jab her throat and raced toward the back of the house. I found a basement stairwell and heard muffled screams. At the bottom, I found my family and hurriedly untied them. As we got ready to leave, the basement door closed and locked. Then a voice on the phone gave new information. "Someone in your life cares about you enough to come find you. They will play our game of hide and seek, or we will kill you. Choose who will be our next victim, and then you can live a little longer." Joseph kept telling me not to listen to the threat, but all I could think about was James. I chose my cousin. We were there for a day with no food and no water. Henry and the woman who claimed to be his mother disappeared, likely moving to another town to con other people. We were rescued because my cousin works for the FBI. There's still a lot I don't know, like why these people were obsessed with a children's game or why they used other kids to get what they wanted. Our bank account was drained, of course. Our house was raided. We reported all of it, but I don't think the true culprits were ever caught. We keep to ourselves now, and James hardly ever tries to make friends, and when he does, he never plays hide and seek.
I started working at a law firm about 2 weeks ago. Big, nice building in the downtown Dallas metro with lots of clients that I think anyone would die for. Honestly, I felt lucky to get the job. I'm just a paralegal, and I also had a few things on my resume that I am ashamed about. But one of the associates is a good friend of mine named Tony. "Ashley, it doesn't matter what you did in the past. You're here now. Clean slate. Just enjoy the ride," he said. I had a sneaking suspicion he was also flirting with me because he followed me on social media and knew that I had just broken things off with my longtime boyfriend. I wasn't going to say no to the attention because, honestly, Tony was a good-looking guy. As the first few weeks went by, I got into the swing of things. My job was mostly to handle paperwork and digitize a lot of older cases that the firm had handled back in the 80s. I've always been a history buff, so it kinda intrigued me to learn about the processes that they had gone through and how things had changed. One day, a coworker leaned over my cubicle wall to ask for a stapler and saw that I had a file open from 1986. "Hey, new girl, what are you doing?" she asked. "Oh, I'm just reviewing this case file. It was a pro bono from..." But before I could get 2 more words out, she shook her head and warned me. "You aren't supposed to do that. Just copy them to the database and then shred." "I mean, I have to read it when I put it on the computer," I argued. "No, you're not. You're supposed to scan everything and let the computers handle the rest. Look, I know you're new here, but we have a few high-profile clients that want their privacy, meaning lowly peons like us could lose our jobs if we are caught snooping," she warned. I was taken aback by her aggressive response, but thanked her for the warning anyway. And I also suddenly felt guilty about the files that I had been reading, even though moments before I hadn't thought much of it. I closed the documents up and shoved them to the side, trying to focus on my job that day and also push aside any worry. That didn't work because later that day, my boss asked me to find a physical copy of a case file that apparently I had already shredded. "I don't seem to have a digital copy anywhere," I said when I pulled up my daily log. Surprisingly, while I had been away from my computer, I noticed that I hadn't been logged off, and I wondered if someone had tampered with it during my absence. "Well, you better figure out where it disappeared to. That was an important file," my boss warned me. I was utterly confused. Like I said, the majority of my work was dealing with stuff that was decades old. Why would it even matter? I decided to try and do a little digital digging that evening and stayed overtime even when everyone else went home for the night. Sitting there at the computer with only a few dim lights to guide me, it felt frightening to realize that my job was on the line for something so mundane. But it became a different kind of fear when I scrubbed the hard drive in search of the file. As the computer rebooted, I realized I had admin access, which initially I thought would help me. Instead, I discovered I was looking at files that I had never seen before. Most of them had very simple labels like Camera 1 or Lobby 3. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on one of them, pulling up a video feed of one of the elevators from the previous day. I suddenly realized that I was apparently watching security footage from the building. As I searched the other files, I also found that there were cameras in almost every cubicle, including my own. They've been spying on us, I realized as I shut the whole thing down and stood up. Suddenly, I didn't feel safe there anymore, and I left immediately. The next morning, I went to the upper executives and asked for a private meeting with one of the security supervisors. I wasn't sure what my findings meant, but I felt I needed to report it. "Ashley, you've been here a few weeks, is that right?" the man asked as he closed the door and offered me some tea. "No thank you, sir, and yeah, about a month. I'm a data analyst," I told him. "Well, I assume you're here because of what you found last night on your computer," he asked. Suddenly, the air was sucked out of the room, and I felt the need to try and gasp for breath. "I'm sorry, you know about that?" I asked. "When you joined this firm, you signed a contract that allowed us to do this type of monitoring, Ashley. So yes, we know about that and about the other issues that you've been having with work lately." I was flustered, confused that any illegal paperwork I had signed could be such a direct violation of my privacy. "I'm a little concerned. What exactly are the cameras for?" I asked. "We view it as an insurance policy. Keeps everyone safe," the security exec told me. With the wind knocked out of me, I excused myself and nervously returned to my floor. I thought about walking out, but I knew that I needed this job. I tried to convince myself the hidden cameras were safe and not evasive, but I also realized I was likely one of the few people besides the board of directors that knew they existed. I decided to do something drastic and stupid, but I knew it would get me results. Grabbing some coffee, I pretended to spill it on the computer. Naturally, they gave me a new one and disposed of the old model. That night, once again I stayed overnight, but I wasn't there for work. I went to retrieve the damaged computer and took it home. I knew enough about hardware I could salvage it, and once I did, from the safety of my home, I began to see what else they were spying on. "Well, Ashley, no going back now," I said as I went through the files. Again, the majority of them were security feed or audio recordings. I was beginning to think that most of it might be routine procedure for a firm this big, even if they were keeping it a secret. Then I found a folder with an odd name, Do Not Disturb. With a name like that, I simply had to click on the first video. It looked like a video of a man standing on a roof with a woman. They appeared to be in an argument. Before I knew what was happening, the man pushed the woman off the roof. The next video showed someone actually making out in a break room. I realized it was one of the CEOs that was on our building's front door. The other files were the same, more and more blackmail. But who was behind this? I wasn't that tech smart to figure it out, but it didn't fit with what the security supervisor had told me. Why would they be blackmailing their own executives? Suddenly, in the dead of night, my phone rang. I hesitated to pick it up because I didn't recognize the number, but eventually I did. "Who is this?" I asked. "You've stumbled into something you shouldn't have, Ashley," a voice said. I realized it was a supervisor and my neck hair immediately stood on edge. "Wait, are you watching me right now?" I asked as I tried not to hyperventilate. "We have a bit of a more pressing issue here, and that's the fact that you have seen too much. They'll be coming for you now, so you have one choice. Destroy that laptop and run. Not exactly a clean exit, but they might not follow you if you get rid of what you saw." "Why are you telling me this? What is this?" I asked frantically. "Like I said,
It's insurance. But it's more than that. Corruption runs deep with people that have deep pockets. They control everything, including how judges swing on certain cases. What you saw is just a glimpse of how the world works. I think I have a different option. Turn this over to the police. You do that, and you'll be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Don't be stupid. Don't be a hero for people that owe you nothing. These rich pricks are not going to be thanking you for bailing them out. What we do, by taking control away from them, it's justice. I hung up and stared at the screen. I didn't like the idea of being watched for the rest of my life, so I chose a different option. I left behind a message that warned if I was followed, the data would leak to the best media outlets. Their little secret would get out the moment I go missing. In other words, now I was the one in control of this card. I moved on since then, got away from that life, and started a small firm in East Texas. I don't think I'm ever going to feel completely secure though, because from time to time, I will get an email from Tony. I know you left, but it was on good terms. The firm has been watching your growth out east and wants you back. There's always an opening for you. I delete every message I get, but it's a reminder that they are watching and making sure I keep their secret.
I keep pulling out my teeth, but they keep growing back. Don't neglect your dental hygiene, kids. I wish I'd taken that advice when I was young. Growing up, I had lived on soda and snacks. I guess a lot of kids did, but I'd go through a 12-pack of Coke in a single day sometimes. My parents tried their best to sway me in the right direction, but you know how kids can be with their sweets. So naturally, I ended up with cavities. Awesome. So I went to the dentist as one does in such a situation. They did some drilling and some filling, the whole 9 yards, and sent me on my way. Problem solved, for now. Well, years later, I got new insurance and hit up a new dentist as a result. He discovered that at least 2 of the fillings his predecessor billed me for were bogus. There was no evidence of decay there at all. They were just taking advantage of a kid with a sweet tooth to bilk some extra money out of the family. This led me to, as you can imagine, a deep mistrust of the dental profession outside of this doctor. So once the kindly old man who ran that office retired, I just stopped going to the dentist altogether. I did not, however, stop drinking excessive amounts of soda. Eventually, that caught up with me. It was time to face up to years, actually damn near a decade of neglect. I found a new local dentist who had good reviews. I had to have several extractions, a handful of root canals, numerous fillings. It was painful and expensive, and I hated my younger self with a burning passion. But hey, my suffering was over. It'd just take some time for the gums to heal over, and I'd be all good. There was one sore spot in particular where one of my back teeth had been badly infected and subsequently plucked out of its socket, but the dentist assured me that was normal and it would itch and ache for a bit, then go back to normal as the socket healed over. But the itching just kept getting more intense. It was unbearable. I couldn't exactly scratch it. I applied layer after layer of Orajel to numb the gum, but nothing worked. I was going mad. I had begun drinking heavily just to dull the agony, which was something I swore I'd never do after what happened to my uncle. But I didn't know where else to turn but to the bottle. And then one morning, I awoke from yet another drunken stupor to the unmistakable taste of copper, blood pouring from my mouth. The fug? The itchy socket had burst open. I ran my thumb along my gum line, and sure enough, wait, what the hell? I felt a tooth crowning out of the stitches. What? I'm 34! I lost my baby teeth decades ago! But between the pain and the vodka, I couldn't really process what was happening. I just haphazardly wiped up the blood, downed a few more Tylenol, and went back to bed. So here's the fun part. I was traveling for work that day, so I was nowhere near the only dentist I trust, but this was bad. I needed to be seen immediately. I Googled around a bit, found one that didn't look too terrible in Tucson area, and popped by for an emergency visit. I waited a bit, clutching my jaw in pain, and was eventually taken back for an x-ray. They found that, impossibly, my decaying cracked molar was patiently awaiting extraction. I just had that removed last week, I uttered in confusion. Smelling the alcohol on my breath, the x-ray tech shook his head. I don't know what to tell you, Mr. Harvey. I can see you've had extensive work done, so you're probably just confused, but you can clearly see the tooth right here on this printout.
That's impossible. And yet, there it is. You're going to want that bad boy out before the infection gets worse. I have an opening this afternoon. Piss off. He was scamming me just like that first dentist. I was sure of it. I'd pop some more pills for the duration of my trip and wait until I got home to see my usual dentist. He stopped me with a firm yet gentle hand on my shoulder. He calmly explained that if I didn't get the tooth removed, the infection could spread and cause a litany of other health issues up to and including death. He procured a few mirrors to show me the physical tooth and demonstrate that there was no trickery in the x-ray. Fine. Insurance wouldn't cover it, but it hurt like hell and I didn't want to risk it spreading. Maybe I really was mixing it up with a different tooth I'd had removed. Dr. W had removed 5 teeth total, and I had been drinking a lot. I guess it's not out of the question. Except a few days after my recovery, I felt that same itching sensation again, and this time I felt it in one of the other empty sockets as well. And this time they were pulsing. I clenched my teeth reflexively, which was a mistake. I felt my upper tooth dig into the lower one as my jaw tightened. It squished in and then made an audible pop. I gagged as my mouth was flooded with an earthy tasting goop. I spat it out in surprise, costing my keyboard in thick greenish gap. What the hell? And are those seeds suspended in the liquid? I grasped my jaw in pain and confusion. I could feel the roots of my tooth writhing and squirming in my gums. The now familiar taste of blood mingled with the sap, forming an absolutely disgusting frothing solution in flavor, texture, and appearance. Beneath it all, I felt the next tooth emerging from its post-surgical socket. I rinsed my mouth with mouthwash as best I could and gently prodded it with a Q-tip. Sure enough, this one was hard to the touch, but I felt something give underneath the enamel coating. At this point, panic had set in and completely sobered me up. I felt the sap-filled pustules growing underneath enamel shells throughout my mouth. I screamed, I vomited, I passed out. I don't really know what happened next. I woke up in a hospital-style bed at an unfamiliar dentist's office. I hazily looked around but didn't see anyone. I flicked my tongue around my mouth. Maybe it was all a dream? To my horror, I found a nearly completely empty gum line across my entire lower jaw, and a handful more were missing from the roof as well. Ah, good morning. You were in a pretty bad accident, I'd wager. Not sure what happened, but when your roommate brought you in there, wasn't much to work with. We saved what we could, but, well, I'm here to take a cast for partial dentures, said the stern dentist, presumably responsible for tearing out all those God knows whats from my mouth. I couldn't say much in response between the pain, the analgesics, and the swabs of cotton in my mouth. I just moaned a little. I had so many questions but couldn't utter a word. He took the cast, applying excruciatingly painful pressure to the afflicted sockets with his mold. I'm so sorry, he added as he left, almost as an afterthought. He noted that they'd call in a few weeks once the casting was completed, and to avoid chewing in the meantime. Sure, I'd definitely be chewing with the half-dozen teeth I have left if he hadn't said that. I went home and drank myself to sleep yet again. I'd given up hope. Honestly, I was about ready to take my own life. Then I woke up with a full mouth of teeth again. I'm afraid to chew on them. I can feel the roots squirming and growing beneath the hard shell. I don't know where these things came from or why. I don't know if they're dangerous. Hell, I don't even know if it's worse to pop them open or let them fester. But I can feel the roots burrowing deeper and deeper into my skull in the meantime. And one question dominates my mind now. What happens if they reach my brain?
The park near my house is plagued by urban legends. Most of them are local legends, and the nature of those legends would vary depending on who you ask. I moved here a little over a year ago with my then fiance, now wife, Megan. She and I both worked from home, and we moved right in the middle of the COVID lockdown, so we didn't have much reason to go out and explore our new hometown. We were really quick to make friends with our neighbors. The day after my wife and I moved in with our dog, Kea, and 3 cats, we got a ring on our doorbell and we opened it to the sight of 2 women, both in their 60s. They were our next door neighbor, Sandy, and across the street neighbor, May. One had made us homemade jams and the other a homemade pie. I love pie, so this was the perfect way to welcome us to the neighborhood. The neighbors across the street have a gorgeous patio space, and they said they wanted to have a welcome party for us so we could get to know the neighbors around us. Needless to say, we fell in love with these people. in the platonic sense, of course. I think the neighbors were extra excited about having my wife and I move in because at the time we bought this house, we were newly engaged and planning our wedding and talking about having kids, a fresh young family. All our neighbors are elderly and their own kids have their lives of their own in distant places, so they were looking forward to having some babies nearby to watch grow up and spoil since they couldn't do it with their own grandkids. Honestly, it's sweet. Over the following year after moving in, we would have gatherings and parties with our neighbors and their friends at least once every couple of weeks. They had become like family, and we couldn't be more thankful for their guidance once the lockdowns lifted. May and her husband Fred have lived here the longest. They know all the best places to go for breakfast, lunch, dinner, dancing, music, movies, hiking, picnics, you name it. However, even still, most of the time when my wife and I decide we need some time out of our house, we just go right across the street to spend time on the gorgeous patio with May and Fred. Invite over Sandy and her husband Dale and we just talk. About 4 months after moving in, we got a second dog. A Great Dane puppy that we named Appa, points to my cultured people who get the reference. He was 6 weeks old when we got him, and now he's about 10 months old and 135 pounds of pure mischief. He took up a ton of our time to make sure he was trained. A dog this big without good training can and will break everything you own, including your spirit, so there was a period of time where we weren't spending much time with our neighbors, or anyone, or doing anything, at least until we had the confidence in Appa and Kea to not cause too much chaos, which now we do. So recently the itch to explore our small city has really become more intense for my wife and I. So we've made it a point to go to one new place in our city every Saturday. Most of them have been places that May and Fred have suggested, and they've been right about all of them. When we told them we were looking for a park to take our dogs to, and that we had seen one with a trail that led through the woods about a 2-minute drive from our house, they told us no. Quite adamantly. My wife and I were both really surprised by the force with which May had tried to shut down that idea. We sat in silence, wondering what we may have said to offend her, but she spoke up to explain before we could overthink it. Look, that park is beautiful. Before they built the highway behind our property, we could walk there through the woods. We loved it. She trailed off, but Fred picked up where she left off. It's fine to go there if you stay next to the baseball fields, but don't go on the trails or into the trees. The park is connected to 75 acres of woods, and when I was working as a CI, criminal investigator, I used to get called out there all the time. Fred and May were not glum people. If they weren't talking with a smile, they were listening with one. But right now, they seemed almost disturbed, and Fred explained why. I'm retired, but we aren't a large city. I still sometimes get asked to come out there and look at a body. More dead people have been found out in those trees than any other park, trail, or nature reserve in the next 4 counties combined. My curiosity was absolutely piqued. Back in California, my hometown saw a rash of suicides in a single park one summer. 3 of them happened in just a couple months. They all hung themselves in the trees of the park. Is it something like that? Fred shook his head. No, these here aren't suicides. One of them was about 20 or 30 years ago, but of all the bodies I've seen laying out there, coroner always determined something else killed those people. Thing is, we never caught what it was. After the 5th body, people began spreading rumors and it became a local legend. But over the past 30 years, we've had exactly 59 bodies found in the trees near the trails. May and Fred took turns telling us about the different stories people came up with. Some said the park was haunted by ghosts of a serial killer. Others say the oh-so-common it was built on an old Indian burial ground thing. The most prevalent story is that there is a monster living in the woods. My wife and I are not superstitious, and we didn't believe in the supernatural. Until we decided to go anyway. We both needed out of the house this past weekend. It had been a couple of months at this point since May and Fred told us the story about the horrible, evil Park of Doom. We grabbed a blanket and decided to hang out within a view of the baseball fields. It was a beautiful day. It was 68 degrees and sunny, and in the early morning it felt good to lay out in the grass near the fields and get the even mixture of warm sunlight on our skin and a cool breeze to refresh us. However, as is prone to happen in East Texas, the sun quickly began to get too hot and the breeze began to get too humid. My wife and I still weren't ready to go home, so we opted to move into the shade just a little ways into a line of trees that separated the baseball fields from the playground and tennis courts. Still nowhere near the trails toward the very back of the park. We would have to cross through the tennis courts, another parking lot, and around some gazebos with picnic tables to get into the trails. We did, and we continued to enjoy the scenery of the park. There was a small creek about 30 feet from us now that flowed out of the woods and into a small pond near the edge of the baseball fields. Between the mottled rays of sun broken up by the sun, the shade, and the soft sounds of flowing water, my wife and I found ultimate relaxation. But not before my wife said, "You look good today, and this lighting is awesome. Let me get a picture of you real quick." Now, I don't like having my pictures taken. I always feel awkward, but my wife insisted that I look good, and I was honestly feeling pretty good, so I agreed. Do me a favor though, I don't want to be the whole focus of the picture, so get me in there, but do a panorama so we see a lot of the park too. She smiled and took my phone from me and opened up the camera. I went and stood by a tree and let her do her thing. Once the picture was taken, we set the blanket back down and laid back down. We had chosen to leave the dogs at home. Megan was in need of a stress-free time, and even though the dogs would have loved the park, we wanted to just be able to close our eyes and chill and not worry about either of them wandering off or eating something they aren't supposed to. It was a good choice overall, because it instantly put Megan and I in a better mood. I rested my head on her stomach and she used it as a way to prop up her book. She read and I began to slowly drift into daydreams. After a minute, I opened my eyes and realized how heavy they became, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to take a quick nap. So I let myself drift off until I heard a distant call of the name, Appa. My eyes shot open, not just because of the name I heard called, but because I recognized the voice that called it. My voice. Just as soon as my eyes had opened, my wife had pulled her book away from my head and just looked at me. "Was that you?" Megan asked. "No, but I heard it too." I lifted my head and looked around, but there was nobody else around. There were a couple of cars, but I couldn't tell from this distance if there was anyone in them, at least until one began to pull out of its parking space and head toward where the park exited onto the highway. Maybe it was them. They might just have a dog named Appa too? They were trying to get him in the car to go? Probably, but they sounded so much like you. I wonder if they're as cute, I chuckled. My wife was flirting, which meant she wanted a kiss. I leaned up to give her one before I rested my head back on her stomach and closed my eyes for only a split second. "Kaya!" my voice yelled. It still sounded just as far, but this time angry. I sat straight up and my wife closed her book. "Okay, what the hell?" I said to my wife. "This can't be a fucking coincidence." She put her book into her purse and stood up, and I sprung to my feet and began to look around. Again, I couldn't see anyone. The cars that had been in the parking lot by the tennis courts had all left, which meant that there was nobody between us and the trails. I got this nagging feeling that if there was a killer out in these woods, they likely felt a little more emboldened to come further out of the trees now that there was nobody else in the parking lot between us and the woods. As mentioned before, this is East Texas, and we aren't a big city. It's mostly rural, which means it's a safe bet that most people are carrying a gun. I am no exception to that rule. I put my phone back into my pocket and used my thumb to feel for the gun, but I didn't lift my shirt to show it, and I certainly didn't draw it. I just made sure it was there in case I needed it. "It's time to go," I told my wife as I knelt down and grabbed her purse and handed it to. Luckily for us, we parked near the baseball field, so we were able to head in the opposite direction that my voice was coming from. I kept looking over my shoulder, and though I never saw anything, I could swear I heard the rhythmic sound of snapping twigs following us out of the trees. It stopped once we reached the grass clearing, and we heard nothing once we began walking across the pavement of the parking lot. We got in the car and drove home, and I was so thankful to hear my dogs excitedly barking when I began to unlock the front door. My wife and I both stepped in and checked them out. Nothing was out of the ordinary. Nothing in the house seemed out of place. Everything was as we had left it, and we were able to relax a little more over the next several minutes. We began to speculate together about what the hell happened, but we didn't really come up with any answers that made any sort of sense. The logical explanation was that it was someone we knew was messing with us, someone who knew our dogs' names, and happened to spot us in the park and thought it would be funny to play a prank on us. But that didn't explain how their voice sounded exactly like mine.
I didn't really get an answer until this morning when I started flipping through my phone and looking at the pictures we took this past weekend. I take a lot of pictures of my wife and dogs, but I stopped when I got to the panorama my wife took of me in the park. I thought it was an uncommonly good picture of me where I looked less awkward than I usually do in photos. I zoomed in on my face and considered posting it to Facebook, but then I began looking at the rest of the photo while I was zoomed in, and my heart began to pound when I got a closer look at something between the trees. I am not a twin.
The circumstances that nearly took my life started out normal. I take a bus to work every single day and then go home the same way. I've been riding this bus for the better part of 3 years, ever since I became a registered nurse. The long hours never bothered me, and neither did the late-night bus rides home. Usually it was just me and the driver. He would always smile and be friendly and ask how I was, take my ticket fare, and tell me I could sit wherever I wanted to. I was always friendly back and never felt that anything was out of the ordinary. Not until I noticed an older gentleman begin to ride the bus as well around the same time. When we first met, he was already abroad and reading a book. It looked like he was a lawyer or something because he was well dressed and clean shaven. When he saw me, he asked me my job as if my scrubs weren't a clue, and I even offered my name. I figured there was no harm in being nice to someone. He told me his name was Clyde, and he worked in the downtown area. I told him my name was Miranda, and I had a 12-hour shift in Midtown ER. We were usually on the bus together for no more than 10 minutes, and we would share stories of our life together. Just pleasant conversations. I never would have thought that 10 minutes could change my life. Clyde was super friendly, but rarely offered any details about his personal life. He had a way of asking me questions, and since it was just small talk, I didn't see anything wrong with giving him bits and pieces of my life. That was how it went for a few weeks. Clyde would engage in conversation and ask me a few things, then he would get off the bus and wave, "See you tomorrow," he would always say. Then I started thinking about why he was on the bus. It was very late, and typically no one else would ever be there. Sometimes it seemed like he anticipated my arrival. And then he began to offer me books, small tokens of appreciation for our talks. I declined at first, and then it became awkward. I finally decided to confide in the driver and ask what they knew about Clyde. I waited until I could be on the bus at a time I knew Clyde wouldn't be riding. It took me about a week, but when I was finally alone, I decided to ask the driver a few questions. "I'm sorry if this is rude, but is the man that normally rides with me, do you know him, I mean?" I asked. It probably sounded very strange to ask this. "I'm not sure who you're talking about," the driver admitted. I told them what Clyde looked like, and they caught on quickly to what I really wanted to know. "That guy? Oh yeah, I noticed how he always talks with you. You know, sometimes he rides this bus for hours just to make sure you get on. My opinion, he's always waiting to chat with you," he said. That made me nervous in a way that I couldn't describe. Clyde was beginning to sound like a stalker. I thanked the driver and asked if he could help me a little to keep Clyde from bothering me. "I'm not sure what I can do, but sure," the driver told me. The next day I was on pins and needles when I rode the bus. I didn't like the idea of anyone watching me and monitoring my activities. It made me realize that I told Clyde a lot of personal details that someone could use against me. My birthday, where I lived, and that I was alone, for example. I'm really stupid sometimes, just oblivious to the fact that there are dangerous people in this world. When I got on the bus, I anticipated his smile and was hoping that it would not be a big scene if I ignored him. Instead, much to my surprise, Clyde wasn't there. The driver gave me a grin. I told him I'll have to ride a different route from now on. I don't want my good customers scared off because of his behavior, the driver told me. I was so happy I wanted to cry and thanked the driver repeatedly before sitting down. "If there's anything I can do to repay, please don't hesitate to ask," I told him. He smiled back and closed the door to the bus as I took a seat near the middle. "You know, I'm real glad you spoke up for yourself, Miranda. That guy was never gonna be good enough for you. Girl like you deserves someone more sophisticated," the driver said. "I just didn't want him to get the wrong idea," I said with a shrug. "I get it. He thought he could make a move on you and didn't realize you were already taken," he said with a chuckle. I picked up on that last word, a bit perplexed by it. "No, I'm single," I said. "Sure, I just meant you're off the market," he commented as we turned the corner. I looked out and saw that we passed my stop, and I stood up to tell him, only for the driver to keep going further out of town. I need to get back to my apartment, I told him. Suddenly, I wasn't feeling safe anymore as he increased his speed. Miranda, I want to show you something. Just sit back and enjoy the ride, okay? He said with a laugh, but it didn't sound friendly anymore. I sat down and fidgeted, looking down at my phone. I was about to call 911 when the driver glanced back at me in the mirror and shouted, I hope you're not thinking about trying to interrupt this conversation, Miranda. I waited a long time to be alone with you. I would rather hate for something to happen now, and we never get to really know one another. Where are you taking me? I asked. I didn't see any city lights. We were almost at the county line, and only fields of corn and open sky awaited us. Somewhere you'll be taken care of, he said as we pulled off the road, down through some trees. This terrain was bumpy, and I noticed immediately my phone wasn't working. As we slowed down, I saw that there was an old abandoned airport off in the distance, and the driver pulled up to the maintenance bay. Once we parked, he opened the door and commented, Please don't do something that you're going to regret. I knew he meant that if I ran, he would hurt me. I nervously stepped off the bus and looked around the dirty, dusty hangar, and then I saw Clyde, chained to a rusty army helicopter with his chest exposed and blood streaking down his face. Oh my God, I said, trying to suppress a scream. You like that? I told you I would take care of it. Tonight, you will see how he is never going to bother you again, the driver said as he approached a nearby storage shed and took out several sharp surgical knives. This isn't what I wanted, I said, my body trembling as he cut Clyde's wrist. Miranda, I don't mean to offend, but I don't think you know what you want. Clyde shrieked in pain as blood gushed out. I cried for them to stop. That seemed to infuriate the driver, and they were at my throat next, their grubby fingers almost choking me. I thought he didn't matter to you, or have you been lying again? He said. His breath smelled of rancid gas or tobacco. I had to think fast. It's just, I don't want you to do something that I should be able to do myself, I said as I extended my hand and asked for the blade. Relationships are built on trust. You have to trust me to handle this, I told him. I made sure to keep my voice as neutral as possible. The bus driver looked at the blade, clearly surprised by my sudden change, and for a brief moment, I thought he wasn't going to comply. Then, he passed the blade to me and said, Prove your devotion to me. I walked over to Clyde, tears streaming down my eyes as I clenched the blade hard. I'm sorry you have to see this, I whispered. Then I turned and stabbed the driver right in the gut. I moved so fast he didn't anticipate it, but he certainly tried to fight back. I kept stabbing, screaming in anger until his body was still. Then I searched his blubbering, bloody corpse for a key to Clyde's chains. As soon as Clyde was free, I moved us toward the bus and cranked the engine. To my surprise, the driver was still alive, crawling toward us and calling my name. I stepped on the gas and hit him as we got out of the hangar, his intestines spreading across the windshield like confetti. As soon as I had a signal, I called the police, and they came to our location to get a full report. Clyde and I don't talk much about that night or how it changed things between us. Ironically, we did start a relationship. I guess that's why it's important not to judge a book by its cover.